I'm Devyn.
I'm George, and this is the 25th appointment with Medicinema, your healthy dose of film.
Today we'll discuss two European animated movies without any spoken dialogue, with the Spanish film Robot Dreams and the Lithuanian film Flow.
I was also able to get another short little interview for this episode. I talked to Pierre Mousquet from Belgium, who was animation supervisor on Flow. You can find that interview as a bonus episode on the channel.
You might have also recognized that it's been more than 2 weeks since the last episode. Since the bonus episodes and the additional visuals of Season 2 take more time, we're switching to a 3-week schedule. Should Medicinema ever support itself and no longer be a project that just takes up our free time, then we'll switch back to alternating weeks. But for now, let's talk about some recently discovered movies. So what's something that you've seen recently since the last episode that you really liked?
Yeah, it's a little bit of an odd topic because the rest of the episode will be very child friendly and this isn't, but I'll try to keep it PG. I watched the Teen Apocalypse trilogy by Greg Araki, all of them since the last episode. Greg Araki is kind of attributed as like one of the big voices for the new queer cinema wave, I think is what they coined it in the 90s, where a lot of independent filmmakers in the US tackled queer topics. The Teen Apocalypse trilogy consists of Totally Fucked Up, The Doom Generation, and Nowhere. I particularly liked The Doom Generation. It really, like, throughout the trilogy, you kind of see Greg Araki become a more established filmmaker. Like, Totally Fucked Up is still in 16 millimeter, and The Doom Generation was his first 35 millimeter film, and you can see the budget like get bigger over time. They are all about coming of age, following teenagers in not so well off situations. It tackles a lot of the not so kid friendly parts of growing up. Let's put it that way. But yeah, they were really great. Particularly, as I said, the Doom Generation was incredible. Greg Araki is particularly noteworthy for all of his production design. So the sets and the costumes and everything just look incredible. I couldn't name you a second person who does production design like Greg Araki does. Particularly in this case, the third one, Nowhere, has some of the wildest sets that I have ever seen.
Very cool. I have seen Doom Generation.
Oh, really? Nice.
Yeah, no. It was it was a DVD I found at probably 9 years old
Oh, wow.
and probably should not have watched.
No.
And really kind of fucked me up. I'm not gonna lie. That movie kind of fucked me up in some ways. I still have like traceable issues with films
No.
that I won't watch, and it literally comes down to that movie and because of that movie.
Mhm.
But yeah, cool. That's cool that you watched them.
Yeah. I was definitely now old enough to comprehend what was going on, and I would advise anyone to wait for that.
Oh yeah.
What's something that you watched recently?
Yeah, so I watched this documentary called Earthbound USA this week, and it's all about the video game Earthbound, Nintendo game from the 90s, and how the fans of that game came together and fan translated the sequel to the game, which was never released in the United States. And it really documents their coming together as people. There's a lot of footage of them over the last 10 years. This movie took 10 years to make. So you really watch these people grow up over like literally their lifetimes. And it just really encapsulates the 90s in a really great way, and like what life was like before nerds were cool. Which I think is really something that's often forgotten about nowadays, that was a time where it just wasn't like, not even that nerds weren't cool, but like that like nerds were beat up and stuff, and nerds were outcasts, and like we weren't, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And yeah, it was just really, really, really great movie. It was a fantastic movie about people coming together to create projects about their passion on the internet and create communities based on their passion, which, as you know, I know nothing about at all. So it was, in a lot of ways really parallel to my own life and stuff, and absolutely fantastically cheesily made, clearly made by some nerds from the 90s who I think like friends of the people in the movie directed it. People in the film, like, they were also the directors of stuff, and they clearly, loved playing with PowerPoint growing up and stuff, and it shows in their directing skills in not a bad way.
Mm.
Just it's very wholesome. It's a really wholesome movie. If you like anything about game preservation, if you like anything about nostalgia, if you like anything about Earthbound, if you like anything about fan translating games, or just weird counterculture history like that, internet history, it's an absolutely out of the ballpark documentary to watch.
It kind of reminds me from the way you described it, at least spirit wise, of Feels Good Man, like the documentary surrounding Pepe the Frog and the internet culture and everything that comes with that.
I would almost say no, only because where Pepe the Frog and stuff like that, and like overall internet culture is a culture that's really grown and it's gotten big. This is so much more niche than that. Even on the internet, like, this is, this a really small subset of the internet that people are not paying attention to. It's like literally 40 to 50 people changing how game translations were looked at in the industry
Mm.
and making them a real thing that started actually happening. Furthermore, Earthbound itself was like the first RPG game that wasn't just a fantasy game. It took place in America in the 50s or whatever. And it wasn't a fantasy with, wizards and stuff. And whereas, that would have ended up happening, it was because of their like push of getting it translated and making it translated and getting that attention garnered onto it that like really helped, I think, popularize that even more. And even things like Stranger Things have the creators of Stranger Things and the writers have talked about Earthbound being, you know, big influences and stuff. And like it's interesting how this tiny little niche of the internet, this little tiny square of people actually had a really huge impact on like a lot of people's lives without really knowing they were doing it.
Mm.
They're just doing the little internet thing. So it's not as wide scale as something
Yeah,
like the whole Pepe phenomenon and stuff like that.
it sounds incredible. Like I really need to check it out now. But I guess for now, it's time for us to move on to Robot Dreams.
Warning: the following program contains spoilers. Viewers' discretion is advised.
Robot Dreams is a 2023 released 2D animated film directed by Pablo Berger and co-produced by Spain and France. In it, we follow an anthropomorphized dog who lives a lonely life in New York City until he, one day, sees an ad on TV for a robot companion. United with his new friend, we follow them exploring the city, roller skating, and generally having a great time until an incident occurs and the dog has to leave the rusty robot behind on the beach for its winter season. What did you think about this movie? Have you seen this before this?
Yes, I have. Kind of special movie to me because it opened my last festival of 2023, the Biennale. The very first movie I watched there in 2023 was Robot Dreams. And yeah, it was a lovely start into the festival, honestly. I am always super happy whenever there's 2D animation in general, like just the fact that 2D animation keeps on chugging along and keeps on existing and surviving, despite it being called dead for like 2 decades now, is just an incredible thing. How did you experience this?
Definitely watching it for the first time this week. This was not necessarily on my radar. I do love animated films a lot, but coming from my background of really loving voice acting and stuff, a dialogueless film was not on my radar.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, dialogueless films are a daunting task for me. They have to really hit right
Mm-hmm.
to work. This one did pretty well. There's a lot of things I really enjoy about this movie. There's some things I find not tired, I guess is the word, just like you kind of know what's about to happen next, and you kind of are just along for the ride of what's happening. I don't know. It was not my favorite of the week, but it is a very sweet movie. I don't know if it's just the streaming service I had rented it from or whatever, but I did have like almost like when the animation would move, it almost had like a ghosting effect in the animation. I
Oh
don't know if that's
no.
just the way they animated the movie,
No.
or if it wasn't like terrible. I don't know if you know what onion skins are in animation.
No.
It's when you are drawing a frame and you go to move on to the next frame and you get the past frame's like light outline to base your drawing from.
Okay.
If that makes sense. It's almost like you could see the onion skin each time.
Yeah.
It's almost like there was a motion blur to the animation. After a while it disappears or whatever, but it just didn't jive with me super well. But the story is adorable.
I'm gonna like jump in chronologically, I guess, because the very first image is the very first time I had to like take a note. Playing Pong with yourself is an incredible image to start on. Like I can barely think of any activity that would make it clearer that as like an example of loneliness, a visual example. Obviously, it's like followed by the dog looking out through the window and seeing a couple in the neighboring apartment building. And we also then directly get the ad that straight up says, "Are you lonely?" But it's a great first step and like a first setup. And I love the whole him just sitting there with two controllers playing Pong with himself.
I think there's like a meme there, right? Not like a homage of like God, what movie is that? But like the characters playing table tennis by themselves and like running back and forth. Their hit their own ball back and forth to themselves. Very much feels like
Oh,
that.
I have the
Do you know
image
what I'm
in my I
talking
have the
about?
image in
You
my
can see it.
mind.
You can see it. You can see it in your
Yeah,
head.
I
Yeah,
just
you
don't
can
know
see
where
it
it's
in your damn
from.
head. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's fully that's fully an homage to that 100%.
Damn.
It's got to be because it's Pong. Like that was a very deliberate game to choose.
Yeah.
Real quick before we get too much farther, because it's something that is presented throughout the movie. It's whenever you notice it. Speaking of deliberate choices, I thought it was really interesting to make this movie pre 9/11. I only found out later that it was the director, writer, to their choice to make the movie pre 9/11. And I was sad because for a second I forgot there was other animals in this movie besides dogs. I like this headcanon that I had it when I saw the Twin Towers in the movie. I was like, he did that because dogs wouldn't have done 9/11. And I liked that reasoning a little more than just him being like, it looked like a better time to be in New York, which I think is what he said his answer was. He's like, that seems like the perfect time of New York was before 9/11. Interesting deliberate choices in this movie. A lot of them, actually.
Yeah,
But go on.
for sure. My immediate thought was, oh, that makes sense. Like straight before 9/11 seems like the most positive time to be in New York. So I instantly jumped to his conclusions. But yeah, it's hilarious.
It's his, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
There's a lot of things that help with the general tone of this film that makes it charming to me. Like I love the playful, slow jazz that we get throughout it a lot. I like all of the like street musicians and the way, I don't know, like roller disco stuff is implemented. Like that's all of that is super wholesome to me. The octopus, for example, that is like playing the drums on buckets feels both like a super New York thing and also a really like great way to adapt it into this fantasy version of it. There's a lot of pop culture references in this, like a lot of pop culture references in this. Did you pick up on many of them?
Depends on which ones. I did notice that there's a lot of real brands in this movie.
Oh yeah.
The one that really caught me was that he was making banquet frozen TV dinners, was what he was specifically making, which are a very cheap, popular TV dinner in America that I absolutely grew up eating as a poor kid. And it was just funny to see like they're just using that. It's just
That's interesting.
It's just fun. It was a funny juxtaposition, we're not going to have humans in this movie to be a world with dogs and stuff and all these animals, but they still came up with banquet TV villains. Did you write some down?
I wrote down some of them that I noticed. Interestingly, not the brands, and more so like the other pop culture, like in art pieces, I guess. I watch Wizard of Oz early on, like the robot and the dog, and I already thought that was kind of an interesting and specific choice, because in Wizard of Oz, in that world, there are a lot of different species and they kind of all get along as if it's nothing. And with the choice of the city also being like New York, which is kind of the symbol for almost multicultural living, at least in my mind. I don't know if that's for everyone, but for me, it's kind of like almost not an American city in my mind. It's all the cultures of the world united in one city, kind of. So that choice of taking Wizard of Oz, where everyone lives together in harmony, taking New York, where all the cultures come together, and making it a movie with all the different animal species coming together and kind of living there in harmony, it all just added up. And coincidentally, there's also a big theme in Flow later on with the different animals all coming together. So that's a lovely little overlap there. Art-wise, there's also the Dark Side of the Moon poster in Dog's apartment. I think like hanging over his bed. So Pink Floyd exists in Animal World.
Yeah.
He reads at one point Stephen King's Pet Sematary, which is a wild choice.
I think all that's trying to date the movie too. I think that's all trying to exactly give you the idea that it's mid-80s.
I saw a tape by the Smiths laying around. One more that I noticed is that it was super lovely. In the Halloween sequence, the sloth that knocks on the door is like dressed up as Freddy Krueger, and his actual claws, represent the blades, which was just an amazing visual gag.
I can't remember if he's like reading The Wizard of Oz at one point, right?
Or is he they were watching it on TV. Yeah, later on there's that one, like the third robot dream sequence is also like themed surrounding it. But yeah, the one thing I picked up early on was just them watching it. Maybe they also read it. There's a lot of books laying around.
For some reason I thought they were reading it, and it bothered me because I was like, there's just little differences in the movie to the book that they like portrayed in the like dream sequence, and I was like, but you read it. You read the book, it's not that way or whatever. But if they watched it, which I think they did actually, now that I'm looking at things, it is interesting to see somebody made the mention that the Wizard of Oz and whatnot is actually a foreshadowing to him rusting in the water.
Oh, I didn't even notice. Yeah, you're right. Damn.
Yeah, that's an interesting
that's
an interesting
also
thing I would not have thought of.
Just the choice of Wizard of Oz is very fitting. My main next point would be something about like the story and what it all has to pull off from just like a storytelling perspective.
Then I guess I have one more little deliberate detail that I really like they made.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, he is arrested. They're taking his, prints or whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've ever had a dog before. I don't know how common it is to have dogs where you live exactly.
It is common, but I never had one.
I don't know how much you've interacted with dogs before, but their bottom of their feet, they have pads, and they have very specific texture on their pads. They're much like the texture on their nose.
Mm-hmm.
And when he does the inking of his thumbprint or whatever, it isn't like a fingerprint. It's not like a human fingerprint. They very deliberately make it look like if you were to ink a dog's pad. And it's very spotty, and like, it's just such a stupid little detail that's just like, oh, that's really good. That's really, really good. And this it's full of the tiniest things like that. And that was just the one that really popped out to me that I really appreciated about it. Such a dumb detail. It's just really fun.
I later on will have a note that kind of relates to that amount of detail in flow regarding the animals, but we'll get back to that.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's super lovely. My grandparents had a dog, so I did interact a lot as a child with a dog.
Okay.
But yeah, I didn't pick up on that at all. Story-wise, this movie has to accomplish quite a lot to work. Just by concept, like this movie is more so almost a movie about losing a friend than gaining one. And with that, obviously, you first have to establish a relationship in a very short time that the viewer really cares about. And it really pulls it off incredibly. Like, I don't think the robot and the dog really have more than 10, maybe 15 minutes of screen time together before the beach and before they get split up. By the end, we have these new relationships that both of them get into, and it's an even more difficult task then to make us really care about this. But it is necessary due to the very end where both of them get a chance to kind of reunite, and they decide for themselves that it's not what they need or what they want in their life right now, and that they have developed away from that. And to convince us, the audience, that that is the right choice, we again need to be able to relate to that new relationship that both of them have at that point, which again is just a span of a few minutes of time that we get to spend with them. And to me, at least, all of these relationships worked enough for all of that to make sense, for all of the character decisions to make sense. I never was like, oh, god damn it, why did they do it that way or anything like that. So that's an incredible task to pull off in how long is this movie? Like 70, 80 minutes short?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's a movie less about gaining a friend and more about losing one, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would almost argue that it's not even actually about that. That it's about what the relationships of your past do to you and the way you carry yourself after them, the things you bring with yourself after them, and how they make up who you are.
Mm-hmm.
That's represented really strongly in the robot. We're seeing that physically in that he loses his leg, he loses this. He gains the new leg via this thing, he gains the jukebox, you know what I mean? These are the things that over the experiences he's had have physically rebuilt him.
Mm-hmm.
He reflects on that in the moment that he decides to not engage with the dog again. That's a very real thing to look at another person in your life after the fact and say, like, I could go back to talk to them. I could be with them again, or I could engage and make them a part of my life again. But they've already been a part of my life, and I will never forget that. And I have those either scars or addendums to my life, or my, those things that build me up and who I am now. And that's where they belong in
Mm-hmm.
my life, is that past, that what that was. And I think this movie is about accepting that.
It's interesting that you look at it as scars. Like, now that you name it, obviously it makes sense. To me, I just took it as obviously robot changing since the relationship, but I looked at it more so from almost the perspective of the dog. Because in that one, I guess it's also a daydream sequence where they meet up, which just happens in the head of the dog, I believe, like the first time it happens. And the dog checks out the new body and the new leg of Robot. And there's this moment of maybe not irritation, but realization from the dog's end that the robot did change, that it's not the same person that he used to know, and that they moved on. Like, I took it as progress, as character progress. I didn't specifically look at it as scars or like overcoming the injuries left behind. But it absolutely makes sense in that way as well. Yeah.
Well, like I said, the twisted scars or like addendums, like I didn't have a good word, like a positive scar. Like not all of them are bad, you know.
Yeah.
To flip on its head though, right? I think the movie is trying, you know, we're looking at two people essentially, right, and their experiences, and it's not just one. They don't both have the same outcome. What we have with Robot, you know, is them taking those experiences and changing and becoming a better and different person, right? With Dog, we have somebody who doesn't let go of the past and literally goes to recreate their future based on their past. And while Dog is still happy, Dog is literally just doing the same thing again. He's just built another robot friend. He's built something that looks very close to the first robot. This is your classic, like, you know, you see an ex and you meet their current person and you're like, oh wow, you have a type. You clearly have a type.
Yeah.
Like it's the exact same scenario. But it's that person's way of healing still is to find that comfort and stick with that comfort and not change and adapt, which is interesting. Dog even, I think, like, you know, he tries to get them to dance to the September music when Robot plays it for them from the street or whatever, right? It's clear that Dog just wants to be in that position still. They want that life again still. That's what they're looking for. Dog isn't trying to change ever by the end of the movie. Dog isn't adapting. It's just moving on to the next thing, I guess, that's the same still.
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain that better. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. I think it's interesting that in that very scene, however, it is both of them dancing, you know? It's not just that the robot plays the music for him to indulge the dog and to give the dog this experience. He also indulges in that dance, at least for a moment, before dog looks up at him.
You are not wrong.
But adding on to the whole dog returns to his own ways, we have that one dream sequence where Dog builds a snowman and then the snowman comes to life and he hangs out with the snowman. I thought it was interesting that if we ignore that one sequence a little bit later on where Dog finds the duck friend, I think it's interesting that 3 of the relationships of the dog in this movie are with someone that he created with his own hands. Like he assembled the robot, he assembled the last robot, and he assembled the snowman before he came to life. Even though that's a dream sequence, it's a really extensive one, and it's kind of the first functional relationship Dog has since losing Robot at that point. And I am a little bit unsure how I feel about that. Because it's definitely a pattern.
It definitely speaks to Dog's feeling of control and wanting things to be a specific way. The only way he finds these friendships is when he creates them. I don't think it's necessarily, you know, meant in a malicious way.
That's the thing, yeah.
But that is a definite type of person that does that.
I just had a thought in relating to the relationship with Duck. If you look at the relationships of Dog chronologically, you first have him losing Robot, then he tries to make new connections initially without buying a new robot. He goes out on this ski trip
actually,
and has a pretty negative experience there, which is followed by the dream of him building the snowman. So again, him assembling someone to be a friend for him. I think almost as a response to the negative experience he had in a different way of approaching finding friends. He even opens up and finds Duck later on, or lets himself be found by Duck, I guess, which again leads to a negative experience because Duck kind of just ghosts him and moves to Europe. which must have been, I guess, traumatizing to a dog again, which leads to him again buying a new robot and trying to recreate what already worked for him. So I think it's not even that dog doesn't want to change or shouldn't change, but he just had too many negative experiences when he tried to approach it in a different way, that it led him back to his old patterns, to his old ways.
Absolutely. And yeah, like I said, it's not like a malicious thing at all. It makes the idea that Duck leaves completely adds up into that, because that's the only time that Dog has this relationship that is of a natural thing. And more so, Duck is the commanding person in that relationship,
Oh,
where
yeah.
Dog is normally the commanding person in the relationship, right? So it even is a stronger reason for why Dog would be like, well, I'm going to go back to making a friend after this one dropped me. You know what I mean? Like, clearly that doesn't work for me to not be, the person that does this and takes the charge on this.
Yeah, there's a lot happening. Like again, it's
There's a
incredible.
lot. There's a lot that goes on.
Like there's so many different like relationships being established and being ended, and yeah, for the story, all of it to make sense. It's all I think pretty much all of them are needed, and yeah, it's incredible how it pulls it off. Honestly,
Like I said, I really like it. I just some parts were just like it's gonna kind of happen by the
yeah.
and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a good story to tell. It is wild that a bunch of pirate dudes can like pull up on the shore and like do all that stuff, but Dog couldn't just get a rowboat.
Yeah,
Kind of an oversight by Dog on that one.
mhm. The whole logistical element of it's impossible for Dog to get robots is something you kind of have to stomach.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of coincidence with it being the last day at the that the beach is open, and him not getting the permit to go to the beach, and yeah, there's a lot. I did want to talk about the, I guess, metaphor element of robot being stuck on the beach, because that's puzzled me for quite a while. Of like pretty much all of it is in regards to how it relates to real human relationships, and that one was a bit puzzling. I did come to a point where I thought I had an explanation for it. I think a robot being stuck on the beach is kind of a long distance relationship, or like a pausing a relationship due to moving away, due to it being long distance, because it is not really a breakup. Both of them, when Robot lays on the beach, still dream about continuing this relationship once the time is up, once the season starts again. So I think it's kind of like Robot moved away for, like, I don't know, studying abroad for a semester, and they both knew there is like a certain date where they can potentially go back to continuing their relationship. So that's like the closest real world comparison I found. And I think it pretty much adds up, because both dream about continuing it, and it's just the circumstances that get in the way of that, and them kind of moving on from that relationship, kind of changing as people and not really returning to it, which is a very realistic thing for a scenario like, moving abroad and then coming back after a while, and it not really working out the way, as in, yeah, let's just continue where we left it off.
All right. Okay. I did not exactly interpret it that way.
Okay.
I interpreted him being stuck on the beach as he doesn't know what's just happened, right? Just suddenly Dog's like not there. He's trying to rescue, but he can't. He's not going to come back. Why doesn't he come back? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
He is lost. He is a person who has been left behind, ghosted maybe in a relationship. If you want to, like I said, if we want to like make it a real world analog, right?
Mm-hmm.
because he is on the end of the relationship without closure, because he is on the end of the relationship that didn't want it to stop being, right? He then is disillusioned by every single other relationship that comes after, where he is in this state of limbo and he's willing to trust anybody because he's so emotionally vulnerable, right? Or in this case, physically vulnerable, and is willing to let anybody come into his life that'll help him. And he's hoping they're going to be a good person. And this is the dream sequences he has about the people coming to help him on the beach. But in the end, these people are just there to hurt him because they're going to take advantage of him because he's vulnerable emotionally, which is what terrible people do in relationships to emotionally vulnerable people after bad breakups. So it's literally just a person going through emotional turmoil between bad breakup after bad breakup after bad breakup, even though they think they can trust that person.
Interesting.
I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Yeah. I think they are not mutually exclusive. Like I feel like both of our interpretations kind of can work at the same time, honestly. But yeah, it's
mine's not a happier one. Mine's definitely none of mine have been a happy one. None of my thoughts about this have been happy. But I think that's kind of what I do like about this movie is I think it's telling a lot of really sad, really fucked up shit in a very happy way.
Yeah.
In a very bright way.
Yeah, it's a very optimistic tonality, but doesn't sugarcoat any of the real struggles of relationships, which is an interesting general way to think about relationships, because obviously relationships are a beautiful thing, and people strive to have them, and you kind of need them in your life to a certain degree.
Don't listen to him, listeners. Don't be fooled. Don't listen to him. It's all a lie. I'm joking.
Yeah, he says after just saying goodnight to his wife.
Yeah. That's so funny.
But yeah, they do come with baggage. They will sometimes go wrong. They will sometimes hurt you, and you will have to like rebuild yourself in a way to move on from them. It's just honestly a pretty great portrayal of relationships without any spoken word in a really short runtime. Like, that's a huge accomplishment.
Oh no. I just had a terrible realization. Is the dog a groomer? Your silence says a lot right now.
I don't think so. Like, in my mind, the robots are kind of born as adults, but I can see why you're asking that. Yeah.
He has dreams. He has dreams about being able just to create somebody exactly how he wants them to be. Like, is this really a story about like a fucking robot leaving a bad relationship? Like, going through a series of bad relationships until they finally are happy with themselves and they finally see the person that like their first love and they're like, I could go back to it. And they're like, no, you know what? I'm okay. Is that what this movie's really about? Is this movie not about the dog?
I don't think so.
I just fucked myself up with this.
Yeah. I think the robot analogy is just limited to a degree, because there's not really an equivalent to, oh, there's suddenly this adult person out of nowhere and I created it. I see why you are making the connection to grooming, because I guess it is the closest. But yeah,
it's literally
I don't want to believe that.
Oh, man. I mean, I didn't want to believe dogs could do 9/11, but he was like, no, it's just pre-9/11. I just haven't done it yet.
Hey, it might have been cats, you know?
Oh, that's fucked up. That's funny. That's fucked up. What did you think of the actual art style of this movie?
I think it's simple. Like, I don't think too much of it, but it's also not distracting or like bad in any way. I think it totally works for what it is.
It's very similar to because it's based on a comic strip.
Oh, I wasn't aware.
Yeah, it's based on a comic book, and it's not too off. I think if it would have made it the comic book art exactly, people would have found it way too rudimentary. At first, I'm not gonna lie. At first, I was kind of off put by it because I was like, "Oh, this is some pretty basic art style. Like, this isn't really doing anything interesting or whatever, you know." But that kind of plays into the story that it's unassuming more than anything, I think, but still really charming.
I have one issue with the movie, which I almost expected you to bring up because you have had similar complaints about other movies before.
Is it fucking montages? Is it how many montages are in this movie? It's a lot.
I also expected that complaint. No, but I wasn't gonna bring that up. No, it's the song.
I actually have not gotten to my montage part. I was literally about to say I have not gotten to the montage part because we haven't talked about how many times they fucking play September yet. I literally almost just said that to you. Oh my god. Yeah. No. You know what? That orchestral version of September that they play near the end, it's like really big brass band style, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I think if there's like, I forget what they're doing on the screen. They're like doing lights moving into the dog's head or something like that, shapes or something. I literally was thinking in my head, I was like, man, this song would have a lot more hit if I didn't already hear this song like 6 times in the last hour.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a lot. I do understand, like they, I guess, try to make it the theme of the relationship of dog and robot. Like it comes.
It's their
up,
song.
Yeah, it comes up anytime like they first interact and then when they dream about each other. But it's a lot. It's really a lot. They could have used it a little less than the finale would have hit. I like that it's like it plays several times in the first half and then it has a break. Like the last time I wrote it down was at the 41-minute mark where the robot in a dream whistles it again. And then it only comes back in the finale, which helps. But yeah, it's still in that first half. I feel like, just overuse it to a degree where it started to annoy me as well. Yeah. And yeah, I knew you were gonna complain about the montages. I again have the same defense that I used before of like there's a lot, and I mentioned it, a lot they have to develop with characters in a very short time. And I almost don't think it would have been possible without montages to establish 4 separate relationships in 80 minutes, whilst also doing everything else that needs to happen for the story to work without montages. But yeah, there are a lot of montages.
For some reason, I literally have no viable thing because live action should be more respectable for montages. But for some reason, to me, animated montages get a little more slide. They still are, I kind of find them lazy, but they get, for some reason, a little more slide. I don't really know why. Like I said, a live action one should be more impressive that they got so many things for like literally 2-second scenes, right? They built whole scenarios for 2-second scenes. But I think it's just like the way that animation is told through story that it makes more sense to do montages by the nature of how storyboarding and shit works. But like,
and additionally, here they don't even have dialogue as an option, so their repertoire on tools to use for storytelling is even more limited.
Yeah, but when you were saying earlier, like you were like, it's really impressive, you know, that they nail all these things down in such a short time. I literally was in my head thinking like, well, yeah, I mean, it's really easy to do that though when you fucking half your movie's a montage. So I wasn't necessarily, you know, impressed by their ability to do that, but it's
I kind of disagree because just using like if a movie is just montages, it needs to be still like the little moments they choose need to say a lot for that still to work and for us to care.
Mhm.
It's not that I would just watch one big montage and be like, hell yeah, they told so much. They still need to be very specific about every little choice within those
Yeah.
montages.
Yeah.
And that's the impressive part, more so.
Which is valid. And like I said, it does its job well here, and it does get for me a little bit of a slide for being animated. And like you said, the lack of dialogue, they really got to use every tool they can to push the story along in some way.
Yeah, it's a good movie. It's not my favorite animated movie of 2023 or anything, but it's lovely that some small animation is like popping out throughout Europe. In this case with Spain, which I'm not aware if there were many Spanish animated movies before this.
Oh, give me a second. You're fine. No, I mean, they might not, but this is actually a Spanish-French joint animation, correct?
Co-production, yeah. France just has such a huge film industry for European standards that not even just animation, almost like any big European movie will be co-produced by France because they have the resources, they have the studios, they have the animation studios even. It's the same for why Flow was co-produced with France and also animated in France and Belgium, 2 parts. It's just that there aren't enough animators in Lithuania to pull off an entire movie, basically.
That's valid.
And I would assume that a similar thing is happening with Spain.
That's valid. I was just going to say that France has got a pretty good film industry, or not film, but animation industry as well. Like specifically,
Yeah,
they've got some pretty top tier animators happening out there. So I could see why, they would help with that kind of thing. I didn't know about the hold that they have on the film industry in general of Europe. I didn't know any of that.
yeah. At the same festival where I saw Robot Dreams, they also played Mars Express, which was this adult animated film from France that's kind of cyberpunk, kind of in the field of like Ghost in the Shell and stuff like that. It's also visually a little bit inspired by anime. It still does its own thing, but it's very not PG. And that also premiered like at the same festival. So yeah, France is really going strong in animation.
I wanted to give Spain its due diligence really quick, and I wanted to point out that Unicorn Wars, Bird Boy, and Klaus are all Spanish films. Klaus was a really big one. Klaus was a really big one, really good one. Also, I'm surprised these are Spanish movies. I didn't know this. But Planet 51 and The Missing Links are also both Spanish films. I didn't know that. Planet 51, yeah, is a Spanish film. I don't know if you've ever seen Planet 51, but it's like Justin Long and John Cleese and Gary Oldman and stuff. Like, it's not what I wouldn't have expected that to be a Spanish movie at all. Also, very weird and serendipitous, Planet 51. I literally was at a dentist yesterday with my kids, and that was the movie playing.
Wow.
So, come bringing it all around here.
Yeah. I guess with that, we can move on to Flow.
Warning. The following program contains spoilers. Viewers' discretion is advised.
Flow is a 2024 released 3D animated movie directed by Gints Zilbalodis and co-produced by Lithuania, France, and Belgium. It follows Flo, a cat, living alone by itself as a giant flood hits the land. Flo finds rescue on a boat, together with a capybara and more animals joining as we go along, namely a lemur, a secretary bird, and a pack of dogs. The cat has to learn to live and work with others, whilst also overcoming its fear of the water. Devyn, I saw by your rating that you really enjoyed this one.
I really, really did love this movie. I'm gonna go into that in 2 seconds. Is the cat's name really Flo?
It wasn't initially. The fan base just called it Flo all the time to a degree where now the director himself also adapted that. Like the whole team calls the cat Flo now.
I really like this movie. Yes, absolutely. I watched this with my children. They were super apprehensive about watching a movie with no dialogue. I had already built it up that this movie had no words in it, and they were just going to deal with it. And they were like, "Man, I don't want to do this." And I was like, "You're going to do it. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine." And yeah, man, what a good movie. What a fantastic film. I really don't usually like movies without words, as we were just talking about. It's not really my thing. This one just nails it in all aspects. It does have one thing that I don't really care for that kind of knocked it down a little bit for me. But it's such a fun experience. It's a good experience of a film. I don't know how much of my kids added that effect. And I'm going to be really honest about this. I think that this might be a shared experience between a lot of people who've seen this movie because it's a family film. People watch this movie with their kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
My kids were making fucking voices for these animals the entire time. You know, like the cat would fall in the water and the capybara would look over and my son would be like, "Bro, you okay?" Or whatever. And like, just they were being funny. And like, it wasn't that it made the movie funnier, but it made the entire experience of sitting with my kids in my arms and watching this movie that much more enjoyable. That it was like, it's like the same exact kind of feedback feeling you get from like going to a movie theater where you can throw popcorn at the screen. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like interactive
Kind of a midnight
night movie type
madness
experiences, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it gave it that same feeling, except you know, you can do that with any movie, right? But you're not going to hear what's going on. You're going to lose what's happening in the movie. They were augmenting that instead of taking away from it. You know, they were adding to that because there is no dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
But the movie and the animation, as I'm sure you're going to touch on in a few minutes, is so delicate, accurate, and nuanced,
Yeah.
but at the same time so visibly clear that my 5-year-old can read the emotions of a fucking capybara. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yes, exactly.
It's very well presented.
Yeah, I was gonna say that exact thing where I didn't have kids next to me watching this with me. I watched it by myself the first time and then a second time with my girlfriend.
You should rent some. Just rent some kids. just rent some kids to watch it with you. Go ahead.
Just burst into like a kindergarten with a TV set and force them to watch Flow with me.
There you go. I figured you had some like nieces or nephews or uncles or some cousins or something. But yeah, sure, go with just straight like kidnapping. That's fine.
The only niece I have is still a little baby, so there's that.
That's fair.
Yeah.
But you watched this with your girlfriend.
I then watched this with my girlfriend. I was gonna say, however, despite not having that, I feel like that's what was going on in my mind anyways. Like when you watch these, even without the live commentary of kids vocalizing it, you so clearly see all the feelings and emotion and thoughts in those animals' minds going on due to that nuance of the animation, that you at any point know what they are about in that second. So yeah, it kind of is just that experience in your mind anyways. The only like little issue I have with the animation is in some moments of like the grand gestures when the cat like jumps from one rock to another. Some of those felt a little odd in I feel like the acceleration or something of the animation was a little off to me, but they didn't really matter to me at all compared to the close-up shots of just the eyes, of the pupil widening, and the way the ears like are turned backwards when it's in like, I guess, hunting mode or whatever. And all of those are so on point, are so detailed that it's incredible. And those are the important parts of the animation, and you can feel how they really prioritized that animation. Like, a big part about this is that this is a very small production. This film had a budget of 3 million and is in the running for an Oscar with Inside Out 2 that had a budget of $200 million, you know?
That's a rough versus.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie. That's a rough, because Inside Out 2 is like actually a really good movie. I'm not gonna lie.
I
Dang,
so disagree. But that's a different topic.
There's a lot to be said about mental health in that movie. I
Sure.
wouldn't say like
Yeah,
it's
I
a better movie enjoyable wise, but there's a lot being said in that film. But yeah, go on.
Sure. I guess I'll briefly talk about like behind the scenes stuff since we're on the budget and how this movie came to be. So this was animated by 3 animation studios, basically. One of them being a newly founded studio by Gints Zilbalodis in Lithuania. So he started up his own animation studio there. And since they can't like from zero start off with such a big studio and find that many animators, they also hired a team of animators in Belgium, where I interviewed the animation supervisor of that team. And they had a even bigger team in France, I think in Marseille, but I'm not entirely sure, which also had like the animation director as his credits, separate like team manager basically. And Gints was managing the Lithuanian team. They were super particular in the pre-production. This was all with animated storyboards. This movie basically existed as a finished version already animated just by Gints himself. Just a very bare bones, visually speaking, but story-wise set in stone. And yeah, there were just no revision shots. Everything had to work out the first time, basically. They had very detailed communication as to what the vision was. And all of that just added up to a really low budget and finishing this. It was also famously animated in Blender, the free open source 3D animation software. And I'm sure that also helped bring the costs down quite a bit.
The Blender aspect, I think, is really interesting on a visual level, because I can't imagine that Blender doesn't leave some type of visual footprint, if that makes sense. Like,
I kind of disagree. There are shorts that I have seen, like even a few years ago, animated by like individual people and little teams in Blender that absolutely like they try to achieve or like go for a Pixar kind of look or even more like photorealism kind of looks. And I have seen that pulled off to completion. Like just from looking at those, you couldn't tell that it was done with an open source software.
That's what I'm saying. Is I don't know if it has one. I'm not saying it does.
I'm pretty sure it doesn't. Like
I don't know if it has any telltales. Well, because like sometimes you can tell things like that are made in Unreal.
Yeah.
You know, there's like a telltale effect line, stuff like that. I don't know if it's because it's made in Blender. I don't know if it's the way the team highlights, literally using lighting, important story aspects are more lit than others in the film. There's a couple other weird little techniques that they use, I think, in this movie. But the movie kind of looks like a video game.
Yes.
And I don't mean that in like a, you know, 3D movies look like video games because they're all 3D effects. You know me, I'm a huge gamer. It literally, in its whole being, kind of resembles a video game. My kids, upon starting it, literally were like, what game is this? Like, do we have this, or is this just a trailer? Is this something we have? And I'm like, bro, this is a movie. And they were just enthralled at that moment. You know what I mean? But at one point, something was happening. My daughter was like, this really feels like a cutscene in a game. And I was like, it does feel like a cutscene. And I can't quite nail down still what makes it have that very specific feeling. But it's not a bad thing.
I'm pretty sure it just comes down to the way it is rendered out. I think they rendered it with some sort of variation of cell shading, which often gets used in like 2D, 3D-esque video games.
Yeah, they rendered it in Eevee. Is what they rendered it out on, which I've never heard of personally.
Yeah, me neither.
And so it doesn't tell me much, honestly. But like, okay, like I was saying, like a common, a film technique to draw your eye might be lighting, but it might be color or leading lines. There's a lot of film techniques to draw the eye, right? Negative space, stuff like that. In gaming, because things can be seen from any angle, because the player can move around or whatever, you can't really rely on those kind of things. You have to work on other things. And one of the biggest things that they use is lighting an area brighter to make the player move to that area, right?
Yeah.
It's like a common, like, where a quest is or whatever. And this movie does that a couple times, actually. And it's so light that unless you play an obscene amount of video games and you look for that kind of shit, you don't really think about it at all, But it makes me wonder if that even is on purpose, or if that has to do with, just coincidentally the way they decided to animate the art style they went with this movie, or the like lighting choices they had or whatever. But it just feels like there's some type of background in gaming with these people that made this film, and I like that.
Gints made one movie before this. I believe it was kind of like his student film, but it was also feature length. Like it is 75-ish minutes long. It's called Away.
Impressive.
And he made that all on his own. Like completely, he animated a 3D movie in Blender just on, on his own terms, which is crazy. And it very much has this sort of visual style already. It's a more rudimentary version of it, obviously. But yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to just limitations of how much time and money they have to spend, and that forcing them to go a more stylized route with the art style, which just leads to this kind of result. And I think, like, even despite me not knowing the exact thing, what I was gonna say was that I think it's just kind of as a version of cell shading without harsh outlines, which is often like how they combine it to give it a kind of comic look, using cell shading on 3D objects, which kind of makes it almost into 2D colored planes, and then give those planes a black outline to give it a comic kind of feel. And I just think what they're doing here is that without the comic outline. But yeah, similar visual look in a way before this. I do love Flow more, but if you like the more dreamy parts of Flow, then you will also love Away. It's a really great movie too. And it's also a dialogue-less film.
Now when we talk about the dreamy parts of Flow, okay, are we talking about the end of the Secretary Bird?
Yes, to a degree. But I wasn't even specifically thinking of that. I guess it's the most dreamy one for sure. Like a lot of times throughout this film, I felt reminded of the feeling I get when I watch a Terrence Malick kind of movie, something like The Tree of Life, where it's often not a lot happening story-wise. It's just a scene of the cat, looking out from the boat and looking at nature. And it's just a beautiful audio visual, and you get this feeling of being there, of experiencing this scenario, of just taking in the beauty of the world. People have called this a kind of filmmaking tone poems. I'm not a huge fan of that, but I guess this this one, and maybe even more so Away, are kind of animated tone poems.
I don't even know what that would mean. I don't. What is why?
Yeah, it is. It's a weird
It
term.
seems like a nonsense term.
Yeah. It's people
It's
just
shoegaze music.
yeah. It's along those lines. Yeah. But films like Beau Travail by Claire Denis also fall into that category. Yeah, it's just kind of meditative movies is I feel like a good term, and Flow totally to me works on that level as well.
So, I guess I want to definitely bring that up now. We've kind of started broaching the subject. For a movie that's so deliberate in its storytelling, it's so deliberate in its motions and its animation. The incredibly vague, almost artsy experience of the Secretary Bird
Yeah,
really bugs the fuck out of me.
really.
I hate it. I cannot stand it. I really don't like that. I'm not gonna lie. When you make certain stories, there's always going to be connotations that follow whatever that story is. And this story is about flooding. It's about a giant flood that happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
On its own already, when you say giant flood, that often has religious connotations. That's easily avoided here in this movie. There isn't anything to give you that impression. People, I mean, maybe actually, because there's the idea that there's no people around anymore. Maybe they were raptured and now the floods are happening or something fucking weird. I don't know. But in its essence, nothing is really there to give you any religious connotation. Just things are flooding, man. They're just flooding. But then the Secretary Bird happens, and it's this very spiritual rising to the sky on like a beam of light type thing. And it's not even really explained why that's happening or what's like happened. It's so much more meaning and vibe than it is a direct action happening in the film, unlike everything else happening in the film. So it just feels really out of place to me. And it feels like it gives it a stronger religious overtone or undertone. I just don't dig it. I just don't dig it as much as it's just my one dig of the movie, literally. My one problem with it.
I didn't take it as a religious thing. Like to me, the idea of, I guess, transcending, which to me is what's happening there, doesn't necessarily mean that it has anything to do with religion. Like there's just, from a psychedelics kind of stance, breakthrough kind of evokes the same imagery. It's also the going into the light, even like near-death experiences. To me, that
I hate
doesn't
all of this.
necessarily mean that it's a religious experience, as in, oh yeah, I found Jesus now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even, the flooding definitely ties a Christian religion to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But no, you're not wrong. It can be a spiritual experience. It can be, third man out of your body experience or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But all of that is still a spiritual or ethereal or metaphorical imagery to portray that the Secretary Bird has died, right?
Yeah.
Why though? Like why not show the Secretary Bird dying? We see the whale dying. We see everything else dying that like suffers in this film. We see everything for what it is. Why is this thing coded like that?
There is reasons. First of all, I generally disagree that the rest of the movie is direct with everything, because a lot of the world building, a lot about why the animals are the animals they are, has to do with metaphors and with greater messaging that is absolutely not literal in the story.
Mm.
Like the general world, to me, a lot of it is a reflection, I feel like, of the cat's mind. Like starting off, there's all those cat statues standing around, and like this enormous cat statue that Flo sits on when the flood rises just before the boat with the capybara arrives.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that is mostly a reflection of the cat's self-image or the cat's worldview, where it mostly sees itself. Like it has no friends at the beginning, it has
Interesting.
no one else. It just cares about its own self-image, about its ego. It's a very egotistical person to begin with. And here's a big thing about this movie. Gints talked about in interviews that he can basically only tell stories about his own life. And Flow as a story is kind of a story about the creation of this movie. Like, as I said before, the last movie he made all by himself. And this is the first time he worked together with other
With other
people
people. That's
who
really good.
have other characters who are very different from the way he works. So Gints really is the cat. The flood, I feel like, is a representation of like an issue in your life or something to overcome. And in this case, I guess, is the movie Flow.
Movie itself, yeah.
And he has to work together with an entire team of people that are all different, that all have different views of the world, different characters to overcome the creation of this film. That's also like the reason for, if you take it on a very literal level, these animals would never interact in nature with each other. Lemurs are from Madagascar, I believe. Capybaras are only like in South America. These are very much representations of like a multicultural bunch of people. Again, in a similar way to how a robot dreams with all the different animals is.
I'm gonna burst your bubble a little bit.
Sure, go ahead.
In an interview 10 days ago, he was asked, why did you pick a cat, a dog, a capybara, a lemur, and a secretary bird? What was the significance of their inclusion, or was this just a personal preference? And he said, the cat and dog are inspired by real-life pets I had. The bird is a secretary bird because we had to find a bird that was big enough to carry the cat in one of the scenes. I had seen many videos of capybaras being very chill and peaceful with all kinds of animals, and I felt like that fit the theme.
Yeah, I don't think that is in any conflict with anything I just said.
I know, but it just sounds like he picked them for in a lot of ways. You never start a painting with, I mean, some people I guess do, but most people don't start a painting or a picture with a direct image expecting to get that exact image by the end.
Mhm.
You know, there's with the sculptor, whichever one it was, always said that the art is inside the thing. He's got to find it inside of it, right?
Mhm.
Inside the stone or whatever. So like there's a point where you come up with the idea and everything starts to kind of fall into place artistically about it. So I could see definitely how like these are the animals I picked, and over the creation of the story, the not reasons is a good word, but the representations and the meanings of what these animals could represent kind of started to fall into place.
For sure, for sure. As he pointed out, yeah, he might have just picked a capybara initially for that reason, but that's still a choice of like, okay, I want that one character that is just super chill, and he just looked for any animal and disregarded any reality of like, okay, could those animals meet in real life? Like that point basically still stands. And additionally, that also goes further again with the world building as to the architecture that we see in the film. Like the house that Cat lives in the beginning is, I'd say, architecture-wise, it reminded me kind of the region between Germany and France along the border. They have very similar houses to that, at least from memory when I visited that. whilst later on, when they drive through those almost like temple waterways, those were more reminiscent in my mind to the architecture of Italy. Just from an architecture stance, there's also multicultural elements to that from different parts of the world that, again, don't really add up in a literal sense, but make sense in this thematic thing of it's all different parts of the world coming together. Even with the movie, again, being animated in different parts of Europe at the same time.
All of these ideas that don't fit in the literal sense, like you said, like there's no way that a capybara and a secretary bird can be the same place or whatever, or the way that it feels like they're seeing all of the world through the flood, not just their one localized spot, right? But it still does not make me like the way they handled the stork dying.
That's totally okay.
I'll put it like this. In all of the movie, it was the only time that my 5-year-old was like, I don't really get what's happening.
Yeah, I understand that.
And I think that says something.
Yeah. I understand that because the difference is obviously you don't need to understand any metaphor about the architecture of this movie to still come along with the story, whilst this scene really doesn't have a too literal thing of a visual to make you understand it. I do understand the disparity there. I feel like that's just from watching Away, that's very much Gints.
On brand.
Yeah, it's very on brand for him. And I feel like it's almost like he dialed it back to just not include too much of it, but he couldn't let go of that one time where he still wanted to do it. But yeah, I do understand that criticism.
It's funny that the way you describe where the cat lives and the house the cat belongs to, right? Because in my head, it was this is a witch from a Ghibli movie's house that poses as a wood carver, and this is her cat.
Which is interesting because a lot of the Ghibli architecture, whenever it's not Japanese at least,
it's French, German,
yeah, is from like the French Alps, from the Swiss Alps, like inspired. So it's just like geographically speaking, I'm basically talking about the architecture that you can find like 100 kilometers more north. It's really close to where the houses are that inspired Ghibli.
Well, I mean that's traceable. We know that that's all probably from Grimm's brothers. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it's also more directly inspired by, like Miyazaki talked about this. A lot of his stuff is inspired by Heidi, like that girl living in the Alps, and there was that animated series, that old one. I'm not sure if that's even the English title. I just know the German one.
But I know about Heidi. I know about though. Yeah, I know about Heidi. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense for him. Yeah. Okay. I just meant like a lot of like fantasy architecture, fantasy things like that kind of pull from that area.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that is because we take the majority of at least westernized fairy tales come from German background based fairy tales, basically.
Yeah, that also makes sense. I have one more note on the whole Secretary Bird dying scene, namely as to why I feel like Cat couldn't be there for the bird dying and had to be kind of cut away from the group again. Since this movie is a lot about overcoming your fears, as like represented with the water and with the fears of trusting in other people to help you and to go along with them, overcoming your fears isn't a straight linear path. Usually, and in most cases, there is a point of setbacks where you fall into your old patterns. And there's 2 times this happens I feel like, here. And the bigger one being when Cat falls off the boat and then just runs up this mountain. It didn't initially look out for the boat and try to instantly get back to the guys. It only later on did that. So to me, it kind of is a necessity to show that if you fall back into your old ways, if Cat goes alone and stays away from them, then it will sometimes have consequences, as in it missed the super important moment where one of the closest friends of Cat died, you know? And so there is a reasoning plot-wise where it kind of needs to happen, I feel like.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to rise into the sky all like mystical style.
Well, it makes sense. It's a representation that, at least to me as an adult, obviously, there's a difference for children, for sure. But to me as an adult, it was clear in that scene, okay, Secretary Bird died, without Secretary Bird being next to Cat and showing the literal death of it. So it manages to both tell the I am not part of this right now, but we understand what is happening.
Yeah, it's valid. It is valid. I'm not gonna lie. It's not my favorite portrayal.
Totally fair.
But I do get what you're saying, and I do get the meaning behind it, and I can see how it's a beautiful gesture to the film. It's a beautiful gesture to display it that way. I'm just like, show us dead Secretary Bird. I'm okay. I thought the whale was sadder than the Secretary Bird, to be honest.
Yeah, which is also the second time this kind of comes up. So the movie is kind of implied like that the flood is a cyclical thing, because in the very beginning you already see at some points in the background stuff hanging in trees. So this wasn't even like the first flood that we witnessed. And by the end, there is the scene just before the whale where the deer are running around again, just like they did in the opening of the movie when they were running from the flood. And it evokes this PTSD kind of moment in the cat where it again runs from their friends. And yeah, the whale, it's a beautiful thing because it is kind of the unspoken final friend of them. It comes along for most of the journey, like it pops up from time and time again next to the boat. But it's from such a different world that they couldn't really interact with each other. It shows in a way that, you know, whilst for Cat, the water was a scary place to be in, for other animals, it's almost this necessity. You know, the whale can't survive on this land now. Yeah, it gives this beautiful moment to the cat where it connects to its final friend and I guess waits up on the other friends to rejoin them.
Right.
There are several little moments that I wrote down that are just great from a character progress stance. Because again, you know, the no dialogue, they have to use a lot of great little ideas to portray progress.
Mm-hmm.
This beautiful way in which they show the progress of overcoming the fears in regards to the water. The longer Cat stays down there and the more it looks around through kind of audio and through the soundtrack, they are really good with the tonality of how calm Cat is at that moment. And the calmer it is, the more beautiful the underwater world becomes. So that's just a
Interesting.
Yeah, some of the most stunning shots are by the end with underwater, like when it really overcame its fear, basically. So to me, it's a visual representation of, you know, if you're not afraid of it anymore, then it doesn't look as scary anymore.
That is really good.
I love that moment where after the secretary bird joined, Cat kind of goes up to him and tries to stand on two legs like the secretary bird does.
Super funny.
It looks up to Secretary Bird as a character, Secretary Bird saved it early on. It looks at it as a powerful figure, and it tries to, in that moment, be like the Secretary Bird, instantly fails, falls into the water, and it doesn't try again afterwards, which to me is a really interesting way to show off, like, yeah, you might find friends who are very different from you, who have different talents. That doesn't mean you need to imitate them or try to change yourself to become more like them. You still have your own strength. You just need to accept them and, appreciate them, I guess.
It's a really good value to take out of this movie in general. In a very different view of things. So the Secretary Bird is basically the one that's piloting the boat, mainly conning. Excuse me, it's the actual term, conning the boat. And it kind of gets pissy when, I don't know if it's Cat or Capybara that tries to take the boat. I think it's Capybara. And finally lets it take it, and then it flies away, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it pretty much dies right after that. My daughter literally was like, rather just die than have control, huh? I get it.
Wow.
Jesus Christ.
That's a wild takeaway.
Just like, look, man, if you're not going to let me do this, then fuck off. I'm out. I thought that was kind of a funny take to take from the bird in general. I like that most of the characters kind of have their own growth in their own ways, except the capybara. The capybara doesn't grow in this movie in any way whatsoever.
It feels like an old soul to me. Like, it almost, without age ever playing a role, in my mind, it was like the old wise guy of the group that kind of keeps it all together.
That's hilarious, because in my head, it was like, you remember Cabin in the Woods?
I haven't seen that in ages.
And the one dude that shows up with the thermos that's actually a bong. He slaps it back down into a thermos, and he's the cool guy that knows what's going on, and I think he's the guy that lives or whatever. And that's the capybara. Capybara is just a stoner weirdo that knows horror movies. I've seen all these apocalypse films. I know how to survive this. Get in the boat. But yeah, they all have changed. They all have growth. The lemur has this whole thing with the shinies and wanting to be just like the other lemurs because they collect things too or whatever, right? And then they break his stuff. And he gets all mad, decides to go with them or whatever, go with his new family. Obviously, the Secretary Bird learns to let go of control and dies over it. And then Cat, obviously, fear is a huge growth in there. But the capybara, man, just is
he's chill.
He's literally just chill. Capybara is who we should all really aspire to be in this film.
Yes.
He is really the main character to me.
Understandable.
Oh, Dog. I forgot about Dog. Dog changes really early on. Dog learns the lesson that, your friends suck.
Kind of.
No, there's a real lesson there, though, learned for Dog. The idea that, just because the people that you are born into are terrible, toxic people for you doesn't mean that the people you have to spend your life being around. And that your real family is the ones that you choose that are really healthy and helpful in your life and make you a better person and more aligned to your actual interests instead of, conforming into the interests your family has. Dog is basically born in a gang, leaves the gang and
you could also look at it as a moral thing, because there's that scene with the fish where a cat finally, overcomes the fear of the water and starts fishing all day. Cat in that moment also makes progress because it shares the fish on its own terms with the dog, with the Labrador, and with the Secretary Bird. And then you see the comparison a few minutes later when the rest of the dogs arrive, and they pretty much instantly, without hesitation, without question or anything, eat up all the fish.
Yeah.
It shows this like growth of, yeah, the dog learned new morals from its chosen family compared to its initial family.
I could definitely see that, yeah. And I think that the dog already kind of has that proclivity to do that in the first place. When we first see the dog, it runs up on Cat first, does not bark, is just interested, just chilling. Other dogs show up, they start barking, dog starts joining it. So like you very quickly see from the beginning the dog has no problem with this cat, and the dog's like, "Oh, you seem chill," and the other dogs are like, "No, fuck that, it's a cat." And like, so I kind of like that you can kind of already sense that in the dog.
Yeah. And there is like this one big overarching final theme that I wanted to get to, that I kept till now, which is the self-image. Like I alluded to it with the statues in the beginning, but reflections also play a huge part in this. The very opening image is a reflection of the cat looking at itself in the puddle. And the movie also ends on a pretty much identical reflection in a puddle, but then cat is surrounded by its closest friends looking together at the reflection. You have the mirror of the lemur, where initially it's very self-centered. The lemur as well adores himself in the reflection, and after it breaks, it's like a big issue for the lemur. And in the very end, when Cat finds lemur again and tries to reconnect with lemur for a moment would stay with his initial family. But when it looks in the mirror again, you have this very clear image of like the broken reflection kind of having a visual representation of it's not looking at the same image it did before. It's not looking at the same person. It has changed over the duration of the film, and it might not fit into this group anymore. So it leaves behind the mirror even and goes with Cat at that point. So yeah, a lot of like little details with the idea of the mirror.
Beautiful.
I absolutely adore this. Like obviously, I I think I made that clear. But yeah, this was totally up my alley. Oh my god, what a great film! Yeah, I really hope they win Best Animated Feature. Honestly, it would be super historic for such a small European film to just beat out the international competition. This is the widest distributed Lithuanian film in film history already. There's gonna be a statue of Flo in Riga, in the capital of Lithuania, soon, or is already, which is awesome. And yeah, it would be fantastic if a movie like this, that is also like this artistic, like this doesn't feel like a movie that usually would be honored by the Academy. It feels a little bit too out there in my mind. It feels like a movie that would be nominated but then end up losing. And yeah, it would be incredible if this can actually win.
That'd be nice. It'd be nice. I don't even know what's actually else is up.
Inside Out 2 is nominated.
Yeah.
The Wild Robot, which we already talked about.
Oh, that's pretty good though, too.
And the other two are Memoir of a Snail and the new Wallace and Gromit movie.
Oh, that's pretty good too.
A pretty incredible selection, honestly. As of right now, I think like the betting odds are on Wild Robot being slightly ahead of Flow, and then Inside Out 2.
It's got that pre-baked audience into it. That's the problem with that one.
Yeah.
In American schools, I don't know if we talked about that yet, but to like have American kids read that book like just before that movie came out.
Yeah, I think you mentioned it in the episode we did on Wild Robot.
Yeah. So they already had a pre-built audience right there. So yeah, if it wins out, it's even more impressive.
Yeah, because it is really a tough competition to go up against this year.
For the next appointment, we'll stick to animation one more time and discuss the stop-motion films by the Australian Adam Elliot.
Your first prescription is his 2009 released feature film debut, Mary and Max. In it, we follow Mary, a girl growing up in rural Australia, who finds a pen friend in Max, a neurodivergent man in New York City. It's a coming-of-age film, a film about friendship, and a film about psychology that initially flopped but since then garnered a cult following.
Your second prescription is the 2024 released Memoir of a Snail. It follows Grace and her brother Gilbert, who, after losing their parents, get split up into foster homes. It tackles heavy themes like addiction, cults, and also fetish culture. Together with Flow, it was the big winner at Annecy Film Festival last year and is also nominated for the Academy Awards Animated Feature category.
I was also able to score another interview for this one. I talked to John Lewis, who was not only animator for Mary and Max, but was also the animation supervisor, head of puppet fabrication, and animator for Memoir of a Snail. So look forward to that one.
If you don't want to get spoiled for either of these movies, make sure to check them out till the next appointment 3 weeks from now. I'm Devyn.
I'm George, and this was Medicinema, your healthy dose of film.